Usually, when you look at a professional athlete, their public image is, well, it's pretty fixed.
Right. They fit into a very specific category.
Exactly.
Right.
A golfer is precise and quiet. A linebacker is intense and aggressive. You look at them, and they fit comfortably into this neat, predictable little box. But then you look at Mike Tyson, and, that box just gets completely blown to pieces.
Oh, completely. It's night and day.
Right. On one hand, you have the baddest man on the planet, a fighter who won his first 19 professional bouts by knockout, and 12 of those were in the first round.
Yeah, which is just insane to think about.
It is. It's a guy who famously, absolutely destroyed the undefeated lineal champion Michael Spinks in just 91 seconds. It is this terrifying, almost mythical image of destruction.
It's the absolute definition of raw, visceral intimidation. For a solid decade, people weren't just watching a sport. They were watching what felt like a human wrecking ball.
Right. But then you contrast that with the reality of the man outside the ring today. We're talking about a man who famously raises and finds profound peace with pigeons.
Yeah, the pigeons.
A guy who does these self-deprecating cameos in comedy movies, voices a cartoon mystery-solving version of himself alongside a talking pigeon, and who, incredibly, stepped back into the ring in his late 50s to fight a YouTuber. It is a staggering whiplash of an identity.
It really is, which is exactly why we are looking at this massive stack of biographical sources today. For this deep dive, we are looking at a life defined by absolute extremes.
Yeah, completely.
And to really understand how a person can swing so violently from a feared heavyweight champion to a convicted felon and then to a beloved entertainer, you really have to understand the forge that built him.
And that forge was Brownsville, Brooklyn in the 1970s. Mike Tyson wasn't born Iron Mike in 1966. His biological father is listed as Purcell Tyson, but the man he knew as his father just abandoned the family when Mike was born.
Leaving his mother, Lorna May, to care for the kids on her own.
Right, in an environment of extreme vulnerability. Brownsville was an incredibly rough, high-crime neighborhood.
And young Mike was a prime target there. He was a vulnerable kid. He had a high-pitched voice, a noticeable lisp, and he was, constantly ridiculed and bullied by the older kids. He spent a lot of his early years literally just trying to hide.
Which actually brings us to the pigeons. You hear Mike Tyson, and you naturally think of unprovoked explosive aggression.
Sure, that's the image.
But his first physical altercation was actually the exact opposite of that. According to his own accounts of the sources, he got into his first brawl with a bigger kid who had literally pulled the head off one of Tyson's beloved pigeons right in front of him.
It's a very poignant origin story, really. The very first time he realizes he can use his fists, it's to defend this incredibly gentle, fragile thing that he loved.
Wow, yeah, that's true.
But that realization that violence could protect him from the world, it just quickly spiraled out of control. By the time he was 13 years old, he had been arrested 38 times.
38 times. By 13.
Yeah. He was constantly running with street gangs, getting involved in petty crimes, and it eventually landed him at the Tryon School for Boys, which was a juvenile detention center in upstate New York.
And that facility is where the trajectory of boxing history changes forever. A counselor there named Bobby Stewart, who happened to be a former boxer, notices this 13-year-old kid has just absurd physical power.
Like bench pressing more than his own body weight kind of power.
Exactly. So Stewart introduces him to the legendary boxing manager and trainer, Cus D'Amato. And D'Amato basically becomes the anchor of Tyson's entire existence.
Especially after Tyson's mother died. He was just 16 when that happened. And D'Amato didn't just train him. He became his legal guardian. He moved Tyson into his own house in Catskill, New York.
That's a huge shift.
It was everything. Cus provided the discipline and the psychological framework that Tyson had completely lacked growing up in Brownsville.
Let's talk about the physical framework Cus taught him, too, because it is crucial to understanding why Tyson was so terrifying in the ring. He didn't just teach him to punch hard. D'Amato drilled him in a highly specific defensive system called the peekaboo style.
Right, and it's called that for a very literal reason. D'Amato taught Tyson to hold his gloves high, tight against his cheeks, directly in front of his face, like playing peekaboo.
Yeah, it looks so distinctive.
And the whole point of the style is relentless forward pressure coupled with constant head movement. You slip under an opponent's punch, and because your hands are already up by your face, you are perfectly positioned to counterattack.
It's pure physics. Tyson would crouch down low, slip a jab, and use the massive spring in his legs to explode upward with hooks and uppercuts. He wasn't just arm strength. He was driving his entire body weight from the floor into his opponent's chin,
Which is terrifying.
and the results were devastating. By age 20, he defeats Trevor Berbick to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history.
It was a flawless execution of D'Amato's vision. But there is a massive tragic flaw built into this timeline. D'Amato died in 1985, just a year into Tyson's professional career.
It's like Cus D'Amato was a master sculptor who found this block of raw, incredibly explosive marble. He chiseled away, shaped the discipline, guided the power. But the sculptor dies before the work is truly finished.
That's a great way to put it.
And the tragedy of Mike Tyson is that he lost his foundational anchor right at the exact moment he started achieving absolute professional dominance.
And that dominance is hard to overstate. In boxing, you have multiple governing bodies, the WBA, the WBC, the IBF. This often leads to fractured championships where 3 different guys claim to be the champ.
Right, it gets confusing.
But in 1987, Tyson went through them all. He unified the belts, becoming the first heavyweight to hold all 3 major titles simultaneously. No one could dispute he was the king.
Which brings us to the absolute zenith of his career. The 1988 fight against Michael Spinks. Spinks was the lineal champion, meaning he was the guy who beat the guy who beat the guy, tracing an unbroken line back to the original champions.
And Spinks was undefeated.
Exactly. This was billed as the ultimate clash of styles. Tyson's brutal infighting versus Spinks' outboxing, using his reach to keep distance.
Except the strategy just didn't matter because the intimidation factor took over. Spinks looked visibly terrified walking to the ring, and the fight lasted exactly 91 seconds.
Unbelievable.
Tyson swarmed him, knocked him down twice, and ended it in the first round.
Most people consider this the absolute peak of Tyson's boxing ability.
But behind the scenes, the wheels were completely coming off. While he looked invincible under the lights, his personal life was unraveling at a terrifying speed. His marriage to actress Robin Givens was incredibly chaotic.
Yeah, that was highly publicized. It culminated in an infamous moment on national television where Givens sat next to a very calm-looking Tyson for a Barbara Walters 2020 interview and described her life with him as torture, pure hell, worse than anything I could possibly imagine. They divorced shortly after that.
And it wasn't just the marriage failing. He was actively severing the professional ties to the people who built him. He parted ways with his longtime manager, Bill Caton, and crucially, he fired Kevin Rooney.
And Rooney was the trainer who had taken over after D'Amato died, right?
Right. And firing Rooney wasn't just a business decision. It had immediate mechanical consequences in the ring. Without Rooney in his corner screaming the number codes for the peekaboo combinations, Tyson stopped moving his head.
Oh, wow.
He stopped slipping punches. He just became a headhunter, walking straight forward looking for one knockout blow.
Which leads us directly to February 1990 in Tokyo. Buster Douglas.
Is Tokyo upset?
It is still considered one of the most shocking moments in modern sports history. Tyson was a massive 42-1 betting favorite, but he wasn't training vigorously. He was partying.
Yeah, he wasn't focused at all.
And Buster Douglas didn't just get a lucky punch. Douglas executed a brilliant game plan. He had a 12-inch reach advantage, and he used a stiff, relentless jab to keep Tyson on the outside. Every time Tyson tried to load up that big shot, Douglas popped him with the jab.
Now, Tyson did manage to knock Douglas down in the 8th round, and Tyson's camp later complained the referee's count was slow, giving Douglas extra time to recover. But the reality is Douglas got up.
He did.
And in the 10th round, Douglas unleashed a brutal uppercut and a combination that knocked Tyson out for the very first time in his career. Tyson's corner was so utterly unprepared for him to even take damage that they didn't even have a proper ice pack for his swollen eye. They were literally using a rubber glove filled with ice water.
We always hear about Buster Douglas having the fight of his life. But reading through these sources, the Buster Douglas loss wasn't really a failure of boxing strategy. It was the physical manifestation of a man whose personal life had lost absolutely all its guardrails.
That's entirely accurate.
When you systematically remove the structures that keep you grounded, your mentor, your trainer, your stability, the collapse in the ring is just a symptom of the collapse outside of it.
Exactly. The Douglas fight was the structural collapse of Iron Mike, and unfortunately, losing the world title was just the prelude to a much darker and more severe chapter of self-destruction.
Yeah. In July 1991, Tyson was arrested in Indianapolis for the rape of 18-year-old Desiree Washington, who was a contestant in the Miss Black America pageant.
And according to the extensive trial details in our sources, Washington testified that after accepting a ride to his hotel room, Tyson pinned her down and raped her. The medical evidence was incredibly damaging.
Right, the doctor's testimony.
Yeah, the emergency room physician who examined Washington testified that her physical condition was consistent with rape, specifically noting injuries he had rarely seen following consensual sex. Tyson's own chauffeur also testified to Washington fleeing the hotel in a, quote, state of shock.
Now, Tyson maintained his innocence entirely. He claimed the encounter was fully consensual. But his defense strategy was a complete disaster. He hired a lawyer named Vincent J. Fuller.
Oh, Fuller, yeah.
Now, Fuller was a high-powered, white-collar defense attorney from Washington, D.C. He was used to dealing with corporate embezzlement and tax fraud. He was not a gritty criminal county court lawyer, and he had virtually no experience defending sex crime cases in front of a Midwestern jury.
It was a staggering miscalculation. The sources highlight Fuller making arrogant, ill-fated decisions. He put witnesses on the stand to highlight Tyson's notoriously lewd behavior, bizarrely trying to argue that Washington should have known what to expect by going to his room.
That is just awful strategy.
It really was. He essentially tried to put the victim on trial, which completely alienated the jury.
So on February 10th, 1992, Tyson was convicted. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, of which he served just under 3 before being released on parole in 1995. The conviction also required him to register as a Tier 2 sex offender.
So he spends 3 prime years of his athletic career in a prison cell. He is a convicted felon, stripped of his titles.
And this is where the story shifts from a legal tragedy into a massive sociological phenomenon. You would logically think his marketability would be absolute zero.
You would think so, yeah.
But his first comeback fight in 1995 against a relatively obscure fighter named Peter McNeely grossed over $96 million worldwide. It shattered pay-per-view records. How does that happen? How did the public reconcile the convicted criminal with their own wallets?
Well, because the public wasn't tuning in for a pristine display of athletic sportsmanship, they were tuning in for danger.
Oh, okay.
The appeal shifted from watching a disciplined champion to watching a volatile, unpredictable force of nature. The public has an undeniable morbid curiosity. The darker and more erratic Tyson's narrative became, the more people wanted to pay to see what this monster would do next.
And they absolutely got the morbid spectacle they paid for when we hit the Evander Holyfield era. Tyson regains some belts, but then loses the WBA title to Holyfield in a massive upset in late 1996. That sets up the 1997 rematch, famously dubbed The Sound and the Fury.
Which quickly devolved into one of the most infamous events in sports history. In the 3rd round of the fight, Tyson bit Holyfield's ear. Not once, but twice.
It's shocking to watch.
The first bite actually severed a piece of Holyfield's cartilage. The match was stopped, Tyson was disqualified, and a near riot broke out in the arena.
Tyson claimed he bit Holyfield in retaliation. He was furious that Holyfield had been repeatedly headbutting him without the referee stepping in to penalize him.
Right, that was his defense.
But the context didn't matter to the Nevada Athletic Commission. They temporarily revoked his boxing license and fined him $3 million. And culturally, the bite solidified his transition. We don't just remember the 91-second knockouts anymore. We remember the ear. The discipline of the peekaboo style was entirely gone, replaced by pure, unchecked, chaotic aggression.
And as that physical dominance faded, his financial reality crashed right along with it. We enter his late career decline. He gets a shot at Lennox Lewis in 2002, but gets knocked out. By 2005, he's fighting a journeyman named Kevin McBride.
Let me jump in here. For those who don't know, a journeyman in boxing is a reliable, experienced fighter. They aren't top contenders. They are usually brought in as a safe test for rising stars or a tune-up for aging champions.
Exactly.
Mike Tyson in his prime would have dismantled a journeyman in seconds. But against McBride, Tyson literally quit on his stool before the 7th round. He just didn't want to get back up. He admitted afterward that he had completely lost his passion for the sport.
And losing the sport meant losing the income stream that was masking an absolute financial catastrophe. During his career, Tyson earned well over $300 million. But in 2003, he filed for bankruptcy, reporting roughly $23 million in debt.
How do you blow $300 million? That almost defies mathematics.
It's a perfect storm of zero financial literacy, predatory management, and unfathomable spending habits. We are talking about massive entourages on the payroll, multi-million-dollar car collections, mansions he rarely lived in.
The tigers.
Yes, buying literal Bengal tigers as pets. And throwing millions at extravagant jewelry and parties. He was bleeding money faster than he could fight to earn it.
So you look at him in the late 2000s, he's bankrupt. His boxing career ends with him quitting on a stool. And then the personal tragedy hits absolute rock bottom. In 2009, his 4-year-old daughter, Exodus, tragically died in a horrific accident at home.
It's just heartbreaking.
The grief spirals him deeper into severe addiction issues. He publicly admitted at one point that he was on the verge of dying from alcoholism and drug abuse.
By every conventional metric of storytelling, the narrative should end right there. A devastating cautionary tale about a kid who got too much, too fast, and lost it all.
But it doesn't. He pivots. He manages to execute one of the most unexpected second acts in modern pop culture history. He goes from being the terrifying, unstoppable ultimate villain in a gritty sports movie to somehow surviving long enough to become the eccentric, vulnerable, deeply flawed comic relief in a buddy comedy.
It's an unprecedented reinvention. He leaned into his own mythology, but he did it with a crucial element he never had before, self-awareness.
Right. In 2009, just as he's hitting bottom, he plays a fictionalized version of himself in the comedy movie The Hangover. He's on screen with his famous facial tattoo, he's air drumming to Phil Collins, he's knocking out Zach Galifianakis.
Yeah, that scene is iconic.
It worked because he was finally laughing at himself. He was letting the audience in on the joke.
And he used that momentum to launch a completely new career. He teams up with director Spike Lee to do a one-man Broadway show called Tyson, Undisputed Truth. He literally just stands on stage and talks openly to the audience about his chaotic life, his failures, his time in prison, his bankruptcies. It was raw, but it was incredibly humanizing.
And he kept going. He launched an animated series called Mike Tyson Mysteries on Adult Swim, where he voices himself solving Scooby-Doo-style mysteries. He started a highly successful podcast.
And the cannabis business.
Yes. He entered the legal cannabis industry, building a massive empire that sells, among other things, ear-shaped cannabis gummies. He literally commodified his most infamous mistake.
He systematically dismantled the terrifying image he spent decades building, replacing it with this older, wiser, slightly eccentric uncle persona. But what's truly fascinating is that the ring still exerts a gravitational pull on him, even in his late 50s.
Yeah, in 2020, he creates the Legends Only League and fights Roy Jones Jr. in a massive exhibition match. And then, defying all logic, in November 2024, he steps into the ring at AT&T Stadium against Jake Paul, a YouTuber turned boxer who is decades younger than him.
Which is just surreal to see.
Tyson lost via unanimous decision. But the actual boxing didn't matter. The spectacle generated the biggest boxing gate in U.S. history outside of Las Vegas. And now, he's slated for delayed exhibition with Floyd Mayweather in fall 2026.
This late-stage return to the ring isn't about chasing championship belts. It's about monetizing his own nostalgia. He's realized that his legacy is his most valuable asset, and he is finally the one in control of it.
When you look at this massive stack of sources for our deep dive today, the takeaway is clear. Mike Tyson's legacy cannot be defined solely by an 88% knockout rate or being the youngest heavyweight champion, nor can it be defined solely by his deepest personal failures, his prison sentence, or his massive bankruptcy.
Right. At its core, this is a story of sheer stubborn survival.
Definitely.
It is the story of a highly vulnerable kid from Brownsville who built a massive fortress of physical intimidation to protect himself from a harsh world. He achieved the absolute pinnacle of success, destroyed that fortress completely from the inside out, and then remarkably managed to clear the rubble and rebuild an entirely different life on the same ground.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. Mike Tyson's life proves that a person can completely rewrite their public narrative. You can go from a feared, convicted heavyweight to a beloved, self-deprecating entertainer who fights YouTubers on streaming platforms. But what does our willingness to embrace that second act say about us?
That's a great question.
Are we a society that truly believes in the power of redemption and forgiveness? Or are we just endlessly, hopelessly addicted to the spectacle, willing to look past anything as long as the person keeps us entertained?